Do you, as a Canadian citizen, have an opinion on how the Canadian government can rebuild and recruit and retain many of the fighting people that we have in this country? Do you further have an opinion on which armaments we should be investing in and how they can be rebuilt in this country? Well, the CBC thinks you're nothing but a fanboy and you should be quiet. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Mark Carney boasted that he will be able to rebuild this country when he told NATO that he can get our spending habits up to 5% on all of our military infrastructure. He has made some fairly desperate moves, including trying to appropriate all of the Dash 8 airplanes that is currently being used by Transport Canada. You can't believe how ill-prepared for military use these particular planes are when their biggest boast is that they can be configured to hold up to 90 people. On top of that, the CBC released an article saying that Canadians shouldn't feel that they have an opinion on whether or not we buy jet fighters, where we build our submarines. No. They should just sit quietly in the corner while the Liberal government decides where we're going to spend $80 billion in this particular fiscal cycle. Got a lot to get into, so let's dive right in. Well, the brain trust at the CBC feels that Canadians shouldn't be trying to contribute to the improvements or the investments of our military with our money. Canada at the defense crossroads. I'm not sure what that even means. The challenges of thinking long term. Wow. If you're telling me that you can't think long term, you have bigger problems and you should put your pen down and go, do some self-analysis. It has been generations since the country considered its defense posture this broadly. Well, isn't that the problem? Witnessing the ongoing public debate about fighter jets and submarines this fall has felt a lot like watching people argue over baseball, hockey, or some other team sport. Naturally, it has been particularly uncompromising online, where the characteristics and the quirks of each aircraft and boat have been analyzed to the nth degree, with the kind of fan worship usually reserved for pro franchises. Those who love the F-35 love it a lot. The same can be said for the Gripen. The mania is dialed back somewhat in the debate over whether to choose the South Korean KS-3 submarine or the Germany's Type 12CD, but it's still present. If I understand this guy correctly, Murray Brewster, he thinks that if an individual understands the ins and outs of a particular armament the way that they understand the ins and outs of their particular sports team, which normally amounts to all the statistics for the year that they've gathered, the schools they played for, the amateur teams they played for, how many times their father patted them on the top of the head at Little League, and you feel that that kind of in-depth analysis should be mocked because David McGuinty, he knows better. David McGuinty is Canada's defense minister. So in case those of you that are not aware, lost in all the noise surrounding the minutiae, as well as the debate around jobs and economic benefits, have been some fundamental questions of national security and industrial policy that the federal government has been unwilling or unable to answer. Because the federal government is not capable of solving this problem, they will not be ever able to answer these questions. The two most pertinent questions facing the country, which is about to dump $81 billion into rebuilding the military and the defense industrial base, can be distilled to this. What precisely do we expect the Canadian military to do in this newly, arguably more dangerous world? And what are the key pieces of military hardware that should be built at home as a guarantee of our sovereignty? I could answer that a lot, but I'm sure that if I tried to answer it, you would simply dismiss it as calling me trying to pick a side of a team or any of the other foolishness that has come out of your mouth. And one is wondering how it is that the taxpayers are supporting your media outlet, who in turn pays you with our tax dollars, when you have such a profound lack of comprehension about the issues and the concerns, not only of Canada at large, but absolutely about the military-industrial complex and the fighting men and women of this country. As the CBC attempts to degrade people for having an opinion on what the military armaments of this country should be and how they can be developed inside of our nation and invested with our money, not the CBC's money and not, of course, the money of David McGuinty. Another report has released talking about how housing starts dropped 17% in October. 17% or nearly 20% or 1 in 5. While Mark Carney sat on his hands all summer, the winter came and people in most of the country can't build a house in this kind of temperature, not because they can't work out in the cold, but because the materials themselves need to have a little bit of acclimation. And more importantly, most importantly of them all, when you start a house in this country, the first thing you do is pour a foundation. And you simply can't pour a foundation in the minus weather unless you are going to put a tent over it and put all kinds of heaters on it. But it's just not really that viable because cement has a lot of water in it. And if you leave it out uncovered overnight in the -5, the water will crack the concrete. So you really can't pour it that well in this weather. And as a result, housing starts dropped 20% or near enough in October. The annual pace of housing starts, also known as the new home construction, fell 17% in October compared with September, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation said on Tuesday. The National Housing Agency said the seasonally adjusted annual rate of housing starts was 232,765 units in October, which was down from 279,000 in September. I thought the government was going to get everything up and running. Houses were going to be built at lightning speed. Ever since the Second World War, we were going to be building 5 million homes in the next 2 years. That doesn't really mesh with the numbers that are listed here. I had mentioned to all of you that Mark Carney is not a very good businessman and that he was going to have to be very creative in his accounting to try to convince NATO that he was spending 3% on military procurement. I know the number is 5%, but 2% of that 5% can be given to bureaucracy. That's why the first thing he did was start that procurement building so that he can claim all of the people working in there toward the NATO 5% and in the cap of the 2%. Because he has no idea what he's doing, because he's not a businessman, as I've told everybody, and he doesn't know how to start to develop the military inside of Canada, as he's relying heavily on Germany, or he's relying heavily on Finland or Korea or China or anybody other than Canada, it seems. We are now looking at how can he augment those numbers. And one thing that he has decided to do is appropriate the flying aircraft of Transport Canada. This somehow will go onto the balance sheet as being worth millions of dollars, despite the fact that it is in no way, shape, or form military-grade equipment, and the best that it can hope to do is to transport 80 or 90 frontline soldiers to a particular conflict area, or maybe it can fly some firefighters around, but in no way, shape, or form is it military-grade. Transport Canada's aviation wing moving to the Department of National Defence with little explanation. I'll give you the explanation. It's because Mark Carney's trying to pad the bottom line. He's trying to be creative with his accounting, just like he's trying to do with the budget, just like he's trying to tell you how he'll spend less but invest more. That's all creative accounting. Transport Canada will be surrendering most, if not all, of its aviation wing to the Department of Defence in a plan that's shrouded in secrecy. There's no secret. He's trying to be creative with his accounting. That's simply the long and the short of it. The move of the federal department's, quote, core aviation services, close quote, was flagged in the recent federal budget. It has the potential to affect the long-standing National Aerial Surveillance Program, NASP, which monitors the country's 3 coastlines for pollution and marine wildlife. Those services will be, quote, will be restricted, transferred most core aviation services, functions, and assets to the Department of National Defense, while seeking to leverage commercial offerings where appropriate, close quote, said the budget presented by Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne on November the 4th and passed by the House of Commons on Monday. How Transport Canada's fleet and facilities will fit into the military surveillance picture is equally fuzzy. What we do know is the addition will, like the Coast Guard, also count towards Canada's commitment of spending 5% of the gross domestic product on defense, in keeping with the new benchmark for the NATO allies. The department in September took possession of an Elbit system-made Hermes 900 Starliner drone, first ordered back in 2020 for Arctic surveillance. It has yet to deploy the unmanned system, and it is unclear how the $36 million drone, complete with ground station package, will fit within the framework of the Royal Canadian Air Force, which has ordered, but yet to take delivery of, a completely separate fleet of MQ-9 Raptor drones built by U.S. defense contractor General Atomics. Obviously, we can all agree that Mark Carney has broken another campaign promise. He campaigned on keeping this country strong, and he campaigned on strengthening our borders. Now the one department, Canada Transport, that had the ability to fly over our northern coastline has lost its ability to do that. Mark Carney is going to have to release all of those pilots and probably most of the ground crew because they are not part of the military. So how can they be given access to these planes? I doubt the military has much use for them, as they are not military aircraft. They are transport aircraft. They can either take people or cargo. They don't really fit the bill except for to go on to pad a bottom line. So rather than worry about how strong Canada is being, Mark Carney is only worrying about how he might be looking on the international stage. We have everything we need in this country. They claim that we have all of the critical minerals. We have all of the steel, aluminum. We have everything that we need. We can even have the munitions we require to cause to make things go boom. And yet Canada does not have any investment in building munitions. Canada has not started to build ships, has not started to build shipyards. We've farmed out our submarines. We've farmed out our frigates. We've farmed out our icebreakers. It seems to me that the Liberal government is, by taking these planes, weakening us, not strengthening us, and only trying to make a campaign promise, or at least give the appearance that he has kept a campaign promise. Of course, anybody who can look at it for 10 seconds realizes that that's not what he promised. It's simply smoke and mirrors. That's my opinion. You can let me know what your opinion is down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.